Chapter 802. Perhaps it was because the director of the Environmental Affairs Office bowed and apologized from a more appropriate angle. Even God was moved. At noon on May 6th, a sudden torrential rain poured down, quickly washing away the atmospheric dust created by the fireworks of the music festival last night. Correspondingly, the Jade Light sailing ceremony at the Saka Cruise terminal had to end in a sorry state. The respectable gentlemen and ladies waving to each other on and off the boat quickly disappeared under the blooming umbrellas. The deep flute sounded, and the Jade Light sailed out of the cruise ship dock. Enlu stood in the crowd and controlled the information projection on her retina. It was a list of passengers on the Jadeite Light. He didn't find anything unusual on the list. If he had to nitpick, it would probably be that there weren't too many important people on the luxury cruise that had just left. In fact, among the people on the ship, there were not many who were qualified to participate in the high-level high seas auction in 10 days. A real big shot would never follow the rules of others, just like the Lord she served. However, it was precisely this kind of person who truly dominated the course of events. The ceremony ended in a hurry. In the chaotic scene caused by the heavy rain, people could finally release their true emotions. Inlo heard many sighs of relief. In her view, it wasn't only because the cruise had just left, but also because it was out of everyone's sight. At this moment, his wristband vibrated. Flight NH5753 has arrived. Inlu also let out a long sigh and unknowingly blended into the surroundings. Emoya, who had been in a rush for 5 days, returned safely as the direct flight from Saka City to Sia City landed. At this point, Inli's 2 major missions in coming to Osaka City, finding Snake Tongue and protecting Emoya, could be considered to have been smoothly completed. Inlu made a summary of her own work. He didn't play any key role, and his support position was still stable. Coupled with the departure of the Jade Light cruiser, the stormy Band City should be able to calm down for a while, right? That might not be the case. Over the past 2 days, even Inlu, an outsider, had noticed the subtle and tense atmosphere in Band City. Compared to pure perception, some changes on the market level might be more convincing. His wristband vibrated continuously. He received a short message and an instant message almost at the same time. Inlu carefully read the message before picking up the call. "Hello, Mr. Opin." The voice on the other side was cold and alienated. "Ms. In, the handover work with you is going very smoothly. At present, the yacht has sailed into the Ohori River. It is expected to arrive at Beishan Lake in an hour." "Yes, Mr. Opin. We have confirmed it." Inlu slightly deviated from the direction of the crowd and approached the edge of the viewing platform. This was the highest point of the cruise ship dock. She could see that in the opposite direction of the Emerald Light that had just set sail, there was a small and exquisite private yacht going against the current along the man-made flood channel that had been dug after the war. The exterior of the yacht had the same design style as the Ray that had been docked for overhaul. They did indeed belong to the same manufacturer and the same production line, so they could be considered as sisters. Having such a yacht would allow Mr. Luo Nan to adapt to his living environment without any obstructions. Even if he didn't care about it, being able to quickly find a substitute and successfully purchase it at an unexpectedly low price was mostly due to the treacherous atmosphere in Band City over the past 2 days. As the representative of the owner of the yacht, Mr. Opin took this money-losing business to heart. He wasn't in the mood to be polite at all. "I hope that you will follow the agreement and pay the final payment on time and accurately." "Okay, Mr. Opin. We will definitely pay all the relevant funds in strict accordance with your requirements. In fact, another payment has already been made." "Yes." Mr. Opin confirmed the change in the account, and his tone also subtly changed. A second passed before he spoke once more. "Right now is the transaction window period. I hope that our cooperation can continue." Of course. The call was soon ended, but another message came in soon after. It was still from Mr. Opin. The message contained the coordinates of an address that didn't exist in the secular world, as well as the time. Inlu smiled. Her gaze shifted away from the river and fell into the depths of the boundless curtain of rain. Just looking at this yacht transaction alone, it was nothing more than an exchange of luxury goods. It was purely an act of consumption. But as a qualified businesswoman, Inlu also made full use of the other conveniences brought about by the transaction. For example, information. Okira Rongsan was an important figure in the Great Zay Church, a local church in Ban City. The Great Zay Church had already existed before the Third World War, and it was a rare veteran that could be revitalized in the era of distortion. In the span of a few decades, it had changed from a simple faith group to a mysterious church that could produce supernatural powers. In the tangled and complicated territory of Ban City, they had their own faction of power. Dealing with such an old-school church, especially when it came to matters involving the transfer of large amounts of funds abroad, could often reveal a lot of interesting things. During the transfer process of the yacht, the Great Zay Church behind Okira Rongsan had indeed given a large discount and reduced the transfer fee, and most of the discounts were lost in the secret circulation of funds. In other words, in addition to money, the Great Zay Church also needed to use Li's financial channels. Moreover, they also made some hints, asking Lu if she wanted to take over some of the real estate by Beishan Lake, even some special materials that weren't easy to transport. This was simply the standard mode of quickly liquidating assets and the escape of important figures. During the transaction negotiations, Lu also heard some subtle rumors from various relevant channels. Some were evidence, and some were counterexamples that needed further analysis. But no matter what, it was better than nothing. Without a considerable transaction as a starting point, she wouldn't be able to fight her way into this closed ecosystem. And now the information in Ban City could be compared with T City, Xia City, and even Chan City. She could dig out a lot of sensitive information from them. A part of it was directly related to the Amaterasu Church. Inlu had personally witnessed a series of battles of wits and courage in a certain laboratory with Luonan's support. Of course, she understood what Luonan was concerned about. Mr. Luonan would be interested in these things. After finishing her work at the dock, Inlu turned around and blended into the crowd. Soon, she entered the parking lot of the port. Just as she got into the car, her wristband vibrated again, and automatically switched to the internal channel of the Great Zay Church. These mercenaries from T-City really can't be trusted. When things come to a head, each and every one of them is indecisive. No, they've always been staring at the money. They have no fear for the bloodflame will. Yes. Old Jiang, you're right. Especially that Cadman. He's the root of the prisoners, and has the temperament of a fox. When the first Ablatum was around, he was extremely good. But now that he's in seclusion, he's greedy to no end. He's fiddling with the T-City branch to the point where it's leaking air everywhere. He's infiltrating everywhere into a sieve. He's clearly using the capital of the Great Zay Church to do that extracorporeal circulation. Shouldn't we deal with this kind of person early on? Shouldn't we just wait for him to bite us in the back? Inlu signaled the driver to go back. Then, she closed the rear compartment and responded warmly. Old Jiang, don't get angry. Don't get angry and harm your body. My body is very hard. Even if he really bites me, he'll break all his teeth. But the key right now is the backbone. Recently, the first Ablatum has been paying less and less attention to mundane matters. I know she's brooding over the matter in Xia City, but when it comes to hard power, we can't compare. This isn't something that can be made up for in a year or two. Jiang Yuanjin chattered for nearly 10 minutes before hanging up. Inla shook her head and used her knuckles to scrape the space between her eyebrows. She let out a long sigh, but the breath she exhaled wasn't able to unfurl the lines between her eyebrows. Compared to the smooth progress in Ban City, the situation in D City's headquarters wasn't optimistic. The Bloodflame Order had just moved not too long ago. Their foundation was still shallow. They were surrounded by wolves, like tigers eyeing their prey. On the surface, the call just now was Jiang Yuanjin's old pedant complaining. But in reality, he was transmitting information. He had also misled them regarding the possible eavesdropping. The person Jiang Yuanjin spoke of was Cadman. He was the local representative of the Order's power in D City. Perhaps he was just a snake and a rat at the moment, but as long as this local snake was around, there was always the worry of an unforeseen event that would lead a wolf into the house. Currently, Chan City was leading a global major investigation operation. This gave Cadman an excellent opportunity. During the sensitive period of time that may involve despicable murder, the Blood Flame Order's solidified configuration in the Abyss region, the Blood Soul Temple, was indeed in a highly active state. Naturally, the Blood Flame Order was included in the pending investigation list. If you want to incriminate someone, you can always find a pretext. What's more, this side wasn't necessarily innocent. Yes, the major investigation, operation in Band City, also gave some people an excuse to use force. It felt like these few sides really had a tacit understanding. Inla sighed again and leaned back. Every time she faced this kind of problem, she had no choice but to admit that she still couldn't be considered someone who could take charge of an area by herself. Just thinking about it made her feel mentally and physically exhausted. From the most realistic point of view, this wasn't the level and problem she should be thinking about. At times like this, she especially missed Mrs. Halder and the young boss she had just attached herself to. If those two were here, what would her job be? Feeding the fish? Inla shook her head. She took out a small ornament-like crystal ball from a secret pocket she kept close to her body. She gently and carefully rubbed it in the center of her palm, feeling the indescribably subtle tactile sensation. The inside of the crystal ball seemed to be sealed with a cloud of smoke. It also seemed like a turbid liquid. It was ash gray in color, and there was a flat living creature swimming back and forth within it. It was the devil ray that Luonan had tamed. This mutant possessed a terrifying killing range in Luonan's hands, but right now it was like a pure plaything. She couldn't see any threat from it. Being able to control this existence, at least temporarily, gave Inlu an enormous sense of satisfaction and stability. It was also through this method that she could truly feel the existence of the backbone. No matter what, as long as she was able to attach herself to Luonan, who could easily create such miracles, then she and the Blood Flame Order would have a bright future. Inlu raised the crystal ball in front of her eyes and observed it seriously. She followed Luonan's arrangements and grazed the Devil Ray twice in the past 2 days. The Devil Ray's appetite was great, and it was very obedient. But for some unknown reason, the colorless and transparent filler inside grew more and more turbid. It constantly switched between a gaseous state and a liquid state. The change was extremely obvious. She remembered that her teacher had said that the crystal ball was just a speculum. The Devil Ray's true sealed location was within a spatial fault. What did this change foretell? Inla was puzzled no matter how she thought about it. Her thoughts drifted back and forth. Plus, she hadn't rested well recently. Her mind was exhausted, and she actually fell asleep in the back seat of the car. And then she had a dream. In the dream, Inli's consciousness arrived at the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District. She maintained a subtle state of half-consciousness. She had a bit of independent thought, so much so that she couldn't determine whether this was a pure dream or a cultivation instinct brought about by her decades of life as a priest. Inlu only knew that her consciousness was floating in the lava lake of the stone forest at the lowest level of the Blood Soul Temple structure. She was at a loss, not knowing where to go. Suddenly, a cluster of light appeared. The outline of the light was like the crystal ball she was playing with in her hand. It emitted a bright and precious light, becoming the most eye-catching existence in the turbid and chaotic lava lake. Inli's consciousness couldn't help but shift over. She was pulled by the light source and coiled a few times. She vaguely felt that it wasn't some sort of crystal ball, but a mirror. Her image was reflected on the mirror, but it wasn't too realistic. It was a bit like the effect of a haha mirror. Her habitual image was warped under the irregular refraction and focus of light. But where did this physical effect come from? After another bout of confusion, Inla suddenly had a different feeling. At this moment, what attracted her spirit was neither a crystal ball nor a mirror, but a clear and sharp eye that was staring at her coldly. The eye pierced through all her disguises, tore apart her usual image, and recorded only the most essential elements of her into her mind. She didn't even know what some of the elements gathered in it were. Inlu instinctively wanted to avoid it, but she couldn't help but want to see the result of the reflection. After hesitating for a while, she finally made eye contact, only to find that too much information had been recorded in the mysterious eye. Not only her, but also the stone forest, the lava lake, and the surging emotions, as well as the detailed composition of desires in the lava. If it was extended further, perhaps the structure of the entire Blood-Soul Temple, and even the hearts of the entire Blood Flame Order were also recorded. Everything formed a complicated yet distinct structure, which was then condensed into an insignificant spot of light in the mysterious eye. Like a star in the hazy night sky, it melted into an even more immeasurable universe. It had a real meaning of existence, but that was all. As for Enlu, she was merely an insignificant speck of dust on this star. She didn't even have the value of special attention. Grandeur and insignificance. Loftiness and lowliness. The intense contrast that touched her body and mind instantly clutched Enli's heart, giving her a shock that was hard to endure. It also caused her to suddenly wake up. The crystal ball that sealed the devil ray was still in her hand. She couldn't tell if it was cool or hot. She couldn't find an accurate word to describe it, but it was able to calm her mind. It shouldn't be a dream, right? As an ability user, Enla believed that such a clear memory couldn't be a dream without reason. She wanted to believe that it was some sort of revelation. Perhaps it was related to Mr. Luonan? She raised the crystal ball once more, confirming that the devil ray inside was in good condition. Enla carefully put it away a moment later. She looked at her watch and looked out the window. The car had just gotten off the high-speed magnetic rail. It was gradually lowering the level of traffic, so its field of vision was quite wide. Through the curtain of rain outside the window, one could see the outline of the southern shore of Northern Mountain Lake. A large part of the reason for this was that the surface of the lake had been painted with the color of cheap plastic. These were the simple raincoats worn by the music fans who braved the rain to participate in the event. The sudden rain brought quite a bit of trouble to the recently opened Band City Music Festival. Then again, perhaps the music fans who were able to explode in joy under the curtain of rain would prefer a similar atmosphere? The sense of reality diluted the dreamy feeling, and Enla subconsciously let out a breath. A few minutes later, the car stopped outside the pier on the southern shore of Northern Mountain Lake. A fishing boat was parked there, serving as a transfer boat. It carried her to meet up with the newly purchased yacht. Later on, she would go to a specific area on the lake to do a preliminary inspection. She would make preparations for the upcoming deal with the Great Zay Order. Basically, she wouldn't spend any more money, but she had to gather information. She had to put on a show. After the car came to a stop, the driver in the front seat picked up the umbrella in the car. He jogged over to open the door for Enlu in the rain. In this world, the sense of service of the lower-class people was always on point. Enlu believed that this was something she could learn from, especially since there was a competitor of the same kind who was born here right now, appearing by Mr. Luonan's side. There would be trouble in the future. Enlu got off the car in an elegant manner. Her heels stepped on the water film that had accumulated on the surface of the road. A cool breeze wrapped in the smell of water blew over, bringing with it the fragrance of vegetation. She subconsciously raised her eyes to look into the distance. She cast her gaze at the huge camphor tree behind the boundless curtain of water. Even though they were separated by nearly a kilometer, Mr. Jordan was still the most eye-catching landmark on the southern shore of Northern Mountain Lake. Aside from it, it would be very difficult for people's gazes to be attracted by other targets. However, just a second later, Enli's line of sight shifted to a different angle. She looked in that direction, but it was not a target belonging to the Jorge. Thanks to the sharp senses of an ability user, even though they were separated by a kilometer, she was still able to grasp the most crucial element. Enlu patted the car window, indicating the driver to return to his original position. Go forward. Go under the tree. The driver revealed an awkward expression. Boss Ian, there are roadblocks and warnings up ahead because of the music festival. Motor vehicles are prohibited. Enla didn't wait for the driver to finish speaking. She snatched the black umbrella from the driver's hand. She blocked the falling rain from above and quickly walked forward. The distance of a kilometer from the embankment pier to the camphor tree was only around 200 seconds, even though she intentionally restrained herself. Outsiders felt that this elegant and stylish office beauty was truly well-trained. She was able to walk like the wind even though she wore 10-centimeter high heels. However, they didn't know that Enlu was afraid of neglecting an important person. She didn't know that she was afraid of neglecting an important person in broad daylight. Her heart was extremely conflicted. She arrived under the tree with great difficulty. She was an ability user, but her legs actually went slightly soft. She didn't care about the state of her body. She directly faced the young man who was looking up at the tree and bowed down. She greeted respectfully. "Sir, you've returned." The young man under the tree was undoubtedly Luo Nan. Actually, he had made a few modifications to his face. There was a clear difference from his original appearance, but Lo was able to recognize him with a single glance. The reason was very simple. Luo Nan had an ancient-styled bamboo umbrella on top of his head, shielding him from the wind and rain. The person holding the umbrella was none other than Snake Tongue in kimono. The formal kimono of Sakura City women weren't suitable for traveling in the rain. A single misstep would result in a sloppy and embarrassing appearance. It just so happened that this woman named Kitayama Yuahui was wearing a white kimono. Because she was holding an umbrella, her sleeves drooped down, revealing her jade-like arms. Even Inla couldn't help but take a few more glances. Snake Tongue smiled and bowed when she saw Inli's gaze move over. She was dignified and respectful, just like in the past. Who would have thought that she was actually a curse master with a fierce reputation in the inner world? But why did Mr. Luo Nan find this person first after returning? Inli's state of mind fluctuated a bit. This was because Luo Nan's behavior was a bit cold. He clearly heard the greeting, but the angle of his head and neck didn't change at all. His gaze was still patrolling the branches and leaves of the Zhuojia Guard Gate. He only let out a grunt from his nostrils in response. Inla didn't dare to say anything when she saw this. It wasn't good to steal Snake Tongue's position either. She could only maintain a slightly bowed posture, and quietly ponder, and size him up. Luo Nan was still in the same attire he wore when he left the ship the day before yesterday. He wore a wide-brimmed hat on his head, and there was the support insignia of a certain band on it. He should have bought it recently, and his body was quite refreshing. The lush branches and leaves of the camphor tree had already blocked a portion of the rain. Snake Tongue's bamboo umbrella blocked a large portion of the rain. Even the drizzle that was blown over by the cool breeze from the lake was deflected to the side of his body, unable to touch his body in the slightest. It was as if there was an invisible barrier existing. It was quite miraculous. In addition, there was also. Today Luo Nan was actually wearing glasses. Moreover, it was an extremely retro monocle. It was a monocle that practically no one used in reality. He wasn't like the characters in movies and TV shows, where the lens was clipped to his eye socket. The soft facial contours of Easterners weren't necessarily able to accomplish this. The lens was floating in the air. It was absolutely not a projection effect. There really was a mirror-like object stuck to Luo Nan's cheek, floating in front of his left eye. Inla was walking in the other direction. She wasn't able to discover it immediately due to her angle. Special external equipment? Inla subconsciously moved a step forward. Her angle changed, allowing her to see it more clearly. But at this moment, Inla didn't just notice the structure of the monocle. She also noticed the special texture, luster, and even the image that stabbed into her heart. It was very familiar. It was clearly her first time seeing it. Oh no. Inla drew in a small breath. She suddenly understood that this was the mysterious eye that had appeared in her dreams. Luo Nan was using this eye to observe the Zhuojiawei men at this time. Just like how he had seen through Inlo and the Blood Soul Temple, he directly attacked the core of the Zhuojiawei men. Perhaps it was because of her first impression, but Inlo kept feeling that the enormous plant-type mutant before her eyes was shivering in the wind and rain. Luo Nan didn't do anything else aside from watching. He was like a foreign tourist who had come because of its fame. Under the guidance of the two beautiful tour guides, he lingered on the scenic spot for a bit. He sighed with emotion for a bit before finally leaving in a straightforward and efficient manner. Snake Tongue and Inla glanced at each other. They fell a bit behind as they followed behind. This time, it was Inla who was holding the umbrella to block the rain. The two women cooperated quite well. There was a young man dressed casually, a beautiful and capable office lady, and an elegant and dignified woman in a kimono. The three of them were quite eye-catching when they walked together. It was just that their attention wasn't placed on these minor details. Luonan turned his head halfway and spoke to Snake Tongue. The structure and design of your order is too crude. The imaginary configuration on the mental plane already has many flaws. The efficiency of entering the plane of reality is even worse. Yeah. When the order was established, it was just for the sake of a cover. Most of it was scraped together. It's too wasteful. I'm very sorry. From Li's perspective, this conversation was a bit out of the blue. Luonan, who had been silent for 2 days, had suddenly appeared. Then he studied the so-called structure of the myriad spirit order together with Snake Tongue. In the end, what was his intention? There's also your side. Ah yes. Luonan suddenly turned his head, causing Lu to instantly raise her attention by 120%. The Blood Soul Temple also has room for correction. The main thing is. Luonan spoke halfway through. But the floating monocle in front of him suddenly burst open with countless fine cracks. Some parts even burst forth with fine water droplets. The water droplets soon merged into the curtain of rain. If it weren't for the fact that Snake Tongue and Lu were both ability users, they wouldn't have been able to see it. Judging from the material, the lens seemed to be condensed from water vapor. It was truly a magical technique. The shattered and warped lens blocked Luonan's eyes. It looked a bit ridiculous, but Lu could see that this lens was clearly alive. At the very least, there was some sort of incorporeal power at work. Even though it was shattered, it continued to squirm. It seemed to want to recover to its complete state. Luonan furrowed his brows. In the end, he reached out with his hand and smoothed out the lens. However, there was still a relatively large hole in the center. Fine cracks could be seen on the periphery. In this way, the lens overlapped with Luonan's eyes. The black pupil just happened to be embedded in the hole in the center. Looking at it from the front, the eyes of a normal human suddenly turned into the cold vertical pupils of a viper. There was a kind of dizzying impact. Mister? Luonan rubbed the lens again, but he wasn't able to repair it a step further. He flattened his mouth in a bit of dissatisfaction and continued with his previous topic. The problem of the Blood Soul Temple is the same as my current problem. There's nothing wrong with the configuration design on the mental plane. But in order to perfectly reflect it in the material world, I need to find a compromise plan. This is especially true for complex designs. Otherwise, even if I can support it for a while, problems will arise sooner or later. Speaking of which, Dinwan promised to teach me the art of creation. I wonder if he still remembers it? Inlo automatically ignored the last sentence. Her mind was completely led away by the phrase, problems will arise sooner or later. As the deputy first ablatum of the order, she couldn't be any clearer. In the early years, the foundational sacrificial vessel that reflected the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District followed Luonan's judgment. It collapsed from within. The internal strife of the order was just a natural extension of this matter. She unconsciously tightened her grip on the handle of the umbrella. When she spoke again, her throat was a bit tight. Can this problem be solved? It can be. In theory, it's possible. Luonan responded in an extremely relaxed manner. It can be compromised with material properties. It can also be changed. Of course, there should be suitable materials in the vast world, waiting for us to unearth them. These are no longer the thoughts of configuration. They belong to the domain of creation. The difference is like a thought experiment and a physical experiment. The core lies in the cost of reality. As for the cost, it's the cost of reality. First, it has to conform to reality. Then it's the cost. I came back this time to understand the conditions of reality. I want to take the opportunity to do a few experiments. I need your help. We will follow your will. Sir, please instruct us. Inlu and Snake Tongue spoke at the same time to express their opinions. The two glanced at each other and revealed polite smiles. Luonan didn't pay attention to these small details. He spoke with his fingers. The experimental base requires all sorts of processing equipment and testing instruments. Oh, I have these ready-made, but I still need to replenish them. Moving and the like is quite troublesome. Raw materials. Large amounts of raw materials to choose from. from basic minerals to artificial compounds. There are also extraordinary materials in the direction of the mutant species. Inlo had already opened up her work area. She quickly recorded and filtered suitable items from the database at the same time. The experimental base was fine, but when she heard the need for raw materials, her eyes lit up. The Great Swamp Order seemed to be just right. There's also the experimental environment. The noise from the interference of space and time has been quite serious these past 2 days. Things haven't calmed down in Band City yet? Yes. I was just about to report this to you, sir. Chapter 803. Okira Ryozo sat in his office, dressed in a suit and leather shoes. His sitting posture was upright and full of tension, like a leopard leaping out of the jungle, giving off an oppressive feeling of choosing people to devour. In Band City, especially within the industry that he was in charge of, Okira Ryozo did indeed have the nickname Leopard Head Specialist, which was circulated in private conversations among people. One referred to his spirit, and the other referred to the old scars on his face. He did not mind this nickname, and he even intended to keep improving on this basis, because this was the medal of his many years in the field of ability users, and it was the symbol that he was most proud of. But now the posture was still there, and he looked around, but he could not find a target to exert force on. Outside his office, his subordinates were hurrying back and forth, all moving and processing all kinds of documents, preparing for the sale and handover work that was coming soon. This made him feel even more that the foundation of his career had collapsed. To be exact, it should be a sense of powerlessness. His real goal had always been there, but in the face of a behemoth like the Amaterasu cult, in the face of the extreme power of 2 extraordinaries, let alone an old leopard like him whose claws and teeth were blunt, even if the entire Great Marsh cult staked everything on one throw and fought with all their might, what was the point? More importantly, just the thought of this rebellious resistance made one feel uneasy. Just as he was sighing, his secretary called and asked for instructions. "Specialist, I'm sorry to disturb you, but we have received 2 quotations for the processing plant." Okira Ryozo's attitude was strict, and his fangs and claws finally had a place to exert force. "Is it necessary to disturb me for this kind of thing?" "I'm very sorry. Taijima, you have to fulfill your due responsibility. Don't repeat this information before the deadline for the quotations." "I'm sorry, Specialist, it's my problem." Secretary Taijima was panicking and repeatedly apologized with a trembling voice, very much in line with the image of a prey being hunted. She was also struggling to explain, but one of the quotations came from Director Jiang. She and some of the factory staff jointly submitted a quotation, and we did not consider this situation. Okira Ryozo was very surprised, and temporarily let go of the poor Secretary Taijima. After hanging up the communication, he opened the quotation and looked at it carefully. The more he looked, the more he frowned. What is she doing here? Jiang Zhong, a female scientist with a strange name, was born in the wilderness. In name, she was the technical director of the processing plant for sale, but it was just a title. Her real job was the project manager of President Songping's private research institute, and the 2 jobs were actually unrelated. Oh, speaking of which, that project could be considered as the human resources department of the processing plant. Of course, this was just a joke. Did Madame Jiang really think that she was HR? If it weren't for the quotation sheet, Ao Ping and Rong San wouldn't have known that Jiang Zhong had such a close relationship with the middle and basic staff in the processing plant. Judging from the labor cost of the processing plant every year, the people on the list of quotations would have to go bankrupt to gather enough money to pay for the purchase. What a charming woman. Okira Rong-san is amazed. She has not been in Osaka for many years, and even has the title of remote mentor. But how does she manage this network of interpersonal relationships? Frankly speaking, at this time, Okurin Rong III clearly felt offended. After all, he was the person in charge of the processing plant. Anyone who was in his position would have their self-esteem hurt if they were unaware that a small circle had been created right under their noses. The problem was that he couldn't take revenge. Because Madame Zhang's other identity, was that she was a close friend of the president for many years. She was the kind of close person that would make people doubt the purity of the friendship between a man and a woman. Okira Rong III was a little suspicious that the behavior of Jiang Zhong and the others was the president's idea. But soon he denied this idea. Not to mention that the president didn't need to do this. In terms of relationship, although Jiang Zhong had the halo of close friend, Okira Rong III wasn't bad either. He grew up with the president, and he was 7 or 8 years older than the latter. He had always been the president's henchman, and could be said to be the president's eyes and ears, as well as his confidant. If there really was some arrangement, there was no need to beat around the bush. Okira Rong III gradually sorted out his thoughts. In the end, he still had to inform the president about this matter, but now the first problem was to figure out the plans of Jiang Zhong and the other bidders. Even without considering the factor of Jiang Zhong, the middle-level backbone of the processing plant's joint quotation also reflected their serious uneasiness about the current situation. For the church, it was a bad sign that they had lost control. At least, they didn't pass the confidentiality barrier. Okira Rong III thought for a moment, then dialed the number according to the contact information on the quotation list. The strange number brought a wonderful feeling. He was the actual person in charge of the processing plant, but he rarely interacted with the technical director of the factory, so he didn't even have a private contact number. This lady didn't have any consciousness of working for the Great Zhe Church or the Songping family. She was like a shadow that was neither close nor distant, hidden behind the friendship with the president. When the phone was connected, Okira Rong III maintained a businesslike attitude, but also added some elements of politeness and respect. "Hello, Jiang Zhong, I am Okira Rong III. Yes, I have received your quotation, and there are some details that need to be communicated." "Oh, Jiang Zhong is in the factory? That's convenient. Why don't we talk face to face? Tell everyone directly?" "Of course, we definitely have to talk, but Jiang Zhong, you are also a factory executive. You should understand that now is not a good time to talk between labor and management. It's hard for me to promise anything. After all, it happens suddenly, and there are considerable uncontrollable factors." The phone communication ended in a push and pull that lacked substantive progress. In essence, this round of dialogue was beyond Okira Rong III's expectations. He thought that this was a business or even political negotiation. But in the end, in front of him, it was clearly a union leader, and it was the hot-blooded version ridiculous. Didn't this woman say that she was born in the wilderness? She usually presided over such a project with a gloomy and treacherous style inside and out. How could she be so naive in doing things? Did she stay in civilized society for too long that she forgot what the wilderness looked like? Osaka was not the wilderness, but the conflict brought about by survival and faith would only be more cruel than the disorderly wilderness. This was the situation faced by the Great Zhe Church. If they couldn't bear it, they could either escape or die. Well, an irresponsible person had already escaped first, in an extremely absurd way. The explanation from the headquarters shrine: was it really not a bad joke after drinking too much? Okira Rong III pulled off his tie and exhaled heavily, letting the absurdity and depression in his chest have a channel to release. At this time, Secretary Taijima called again. "Specialist. I said don't disturb me. The president is here. The submarine is parked at the inner dock." Ha! This place was only a few steps away from the inner dock. While he was in a daze, the sound of a chair being pushed and pulled and Secretary Taijima's respectful greeting came from the outside. Aohei Rongzhou hurriedly stood up, rearranged his tie, and buttoned up his suit. As soon as he finished the action, the outer door was opened after a deliberate knock. The president of the Great Zhe Church, Matsudaira Yoshio, strode in. Okira Rong III hurriedly came out from behind the desk, bowed his head, and saluted, "President." Matsudaira Yoshio was a man in the prime of his life who was less than 50 years old. He was skinny and had a casual crew cut. His slightly sunken face was also covered with a ring of stubble. He wore a casual suit without a tie, and his collar was open. He looked a little slovenly, giving off the feeling that he was more like an entrepreneur in the technology industry than the heir of a family shrine. In short, he didn't quite match the social atmosphere in Osaka. However, Okira Rong III knew that this president was a meticulous and ruthless person. Otherwise, he would not have been able to quickly rise to the top in the traditional environment of Osaka, where old-school politics prevailed. In the entire Great Zei Church, only the head of the shrine and the lord were above Matsudaira Yoshio. However, those two rarely asked about worldly affairs, so as the actual controller of the Great Zei Church, Matsudaira Yoshio basically controlled the core power of the church, which happened in recent years. Matsudaira Yoshio sat directly in the seat that originally belonged to Okira Rong III. He stretched his body and was very relaxed. Tonight, the TCC is holding a temporary coordination meeting. I came early, so I stopped by to have a seat. Okira Rong III bowed his head again. Thank you for your hard work, President. You don't have to pay attention to these etiquettes. Sit down too. Okira Rong III thanked him again and sat on the guest sofa, his back still straight. His body was stiff, but his brain was working at a high speed. The TCC jumping out at this time gave people a very bad feeling. The so-called TCC referred to the Osaka Equal Trade Association. In essence, it was a coordination organization that was officially recognized by Osaka to connect legal enterprises and the gray areas such as vagrant exchanges. At present, it had basically become a platform for the organizations of the inner world in Osaka to obtain and coordinate interests. With the existence of the TCC in Osaka and the high and mighty Amaterasu Church, coupled with the numerous church organizations, the inner world's share of interests was greatly reduced. The ability user associations and the like had long been a mere figurehead. Basically, the size of the voice of the various forces in the world of Osaka could be more accurately reflected in the organizational structure of the TCC. The Great Zei Church was a member and director of the TCC and had a certain degree of voice. However, that was only under normal circumstances. With the current situation in Osaka and the situation of the Great Zei Church, such a coordination meeting wouldn't turn into a censure meeting or something like that, right? Okira Rong III was quite worried. However, looking at Matsudaira Yoshio, this president who had only been in the position for a few years still maintained his usual demeanor. This made Okira Rong III admire him, but he also felt a little lucky. Could there be room for adjustment regarding the news about that lord? Okira Rong III's mind was filled with thousands of thoughts, but in the end, it only took a few flashes of thought. On the other side, Matsudaira Yoshio had already started talking about the progress of the mission. Okira, you did a good job in raising funds. Currently, 17 million has been received and the follow-up. In the next 3 days, we can guarantee another 20 to 30 million. However, a large amount of funds still needs to wait for the processing plant and other assets to be processed, which will take more than a week. A week, it's possible. Really? Are you sure the Great Zei Church can still continue until then? Okira Rong III's heart surged with pessimism again. This emotion came so violently that it caused him to temporarily lose control. The question that had been coiled in his heart blurted out. President, is it really as the abbot said, that Lord left Osaka? Matsudaira Yoshio did not respond, but just looked up at him. His thin face did not fluctuate, and his eyes were very calm, but it inexplicably made people feel a chill in their hearts. Okira Rong III instantly bounced up from the sofa and bowed deeply. I'm sorry, President, I misspoke. Don't mind it, it's human nature for you to have such thoughts. Matsudaira Yoshio's voice brushed past the back of Okira Rong III's head, and his tone was no different from when he first entered the door. President, it's a pity that there is no news correction at the shrine that can cheer people up. Lord did leave Osaka. Just last night, shortly after the Amaterasu Church's operation was suspended, he resolutely escaped and took the initiative to close the channel of communication. At present, all communication is one way. If they don't take the initiative, we can't contact them. This statement was a little more detailed than the version that Okira Rong III had heard earlier, but it also brought more doubts. Okira Rong III raised his head, looking confused. But why? That's a stupid question. Matsudaira Yoshio pointed out bluntly. Since he ran away, of course, it's because he was afraid. You're surprised because he ran too fast. Although he had always known that in recent years, his president had become more and more sharp and direct, less and less like he was born in Osaka. But such sharp words that tore apart all concealment and even all dignity still made Okira Rong III, who had served the Matsudaira family all his life and worshipped that lord, speechless for a long time. His feelings were so complicated that it was difficult to describe. At this moment, Matsudaira Yoshio received a phone call and turned to communicate with the other side, which also gave Okira Rong III a chance to breathe and digest. He stood there, looking at the president behind the desk who was calmly communicating with others, and was a little dazed for a moment. The wilderness was really a place that changed people. Okira Rong III still remembered that Matsudaira Yoshio was a young man who was unwilling to be lonely and easily hot-blooded. He did a lot of stupid things, and many times he needed to clean up after him. The stupidest thing Matsudaira Yoshio did was naturally to leave the family's plan and wander alone to explore the wilderness. That was a big trouble that Okira Rong III couldn't persuade back then, nor could he handle. It was this seriously out-of-line adventure in Osaka's traditional family that changed everything. Matsudaira Yoshio finally returned safely from the wilderness. Through those years of experience, he had gained more knowledge and skills. The once hot-blooded young man seemed to have been reborn, becoming more profound and powerful day by day. But for a long time he became a different person and was excluded from the core circle of the family. Okira Rong III suffered an even greater impact. Because of his dereliction of duty as a retainer, he wasted a long time. He struggled for many years in a frontline executive department like the Vanguard, and narrowly escaped death several times. But even so, Okira Rong III still insisted on his identity as a retainer, and stood firm in his position since he was young. For him, it didn't matter how many other changes there were. As long as Matsudaira Yoshio's trust in him remained unchanged, it was the best result. And that was the truth. Okira Rong III's perseverance paid off. After Matsudaira Yoshio took over, Okira Rong III's position within the order skyrocketed. In just a few years he reached the position of a special director, and became Matsudaira Yoshio's most trusted spokesperson. Oh my, looking back on the past, there was really a feeling that things remained the same, but people had changed. Perhaps as he grew older, similar emotions were inevitable. In the end, it was Matsudaira Yoshio who woke him up from his trance. After hanging up, Matsudaira Yoshio reported the latest news. At tonight's coordination meeting, the LCRF's commissioner will also be present. LCRF. Okira Rong III was really shocked. The LCRF was the endorsement agency of the world's most powerful tycoons, the dream fund of immortality. In Osaka, where old-school politics prevailed, it had an extremely strong influence. At the same time, it was also one of the biggest financial backers of the Peace Trade Association. Every year, through this channel, it took away several times the amount of investment. Usually, the LCRF was more aloof, just like a normal investment company, but as long as they were personally involved, Okira Rong III quickly recalled the interest relationship between the Dazawa Society and the LCRF. Coupled with the restrictions of the Peace Trade Association, he knew that the three parties wanted to meet, and the context of the matter seemed to become clear. Is it because of the blood vessel platform? Oh, maybe. Then our laboratory. The Peace Trade Association is just an outsourcing company. It's originally just a matter of looking at people. If the production line over there changes, it's normal for us to change. Matsudaira Yoshio's nonchalant performance made it difficult for Okira Rong III to make any further comments. After all, the blood vessel platform project was managed by the Dazawa Society, and most of it was managed by Matsudaira Yoshio's private laboratory. He didn't really understand. Speaking of private laboratories, Okira Rong III naturally thought of technical director, Jiang Zhong. Regarding the offer, this was a good opportunity. President, I have something to report to you. It's about Ms. Zhang's offer. Offer. Behind the desk, Matsudaira Yoshio raised his eyebrows and looked straight at him. It was obvious that he was no longer in a state of nonchalance. Yes, Ms. Jiang and some middle-level and grassroots employees of the processing plant jointly proposed the intention to buy the processing plant. Occupant Rong III roughly introduced the offer, and the previous simple communication. His attitude was very proper, without any personal emotions. Originally, The processing plant was destined to be sold, and it didn't matter who it fell into. In the end, the criteria to determine whether this transaction was successful were how much could be realized, and whether it could satisfy his president. As for his own likes and dislikes, it was never a problem. Matsudaira Yoshio was not Okira Rong III, but Okira Rong III was Matsudaira Yoshio. This was his belief as always, and it was also his wisdom. Then he saw his president smile, which was rare. So that's how it is. I understand. President? Maybe it's guilt, or maybe it's an anesthetic for self-redemption. She has always been naive. This was the first time Okira Rong III heard his president's evaluation of Jiang Zhong. Coincidentally, it was the same as his previous unspoken criticism. Of course, Okira Rong III wasn't naive enough to believe that the meaning of the two's words were completely the same. He quickly swept a glance at the smile on Matsudaira Yoshio's face, and he already knew what he should do. The newly purchased yacht soon welcomed its new owner, and the process was extremely smooth. The yacht went upstream from the Ohori River and advanced 20 kilometers into the depths of Beishan Lake. The yacht's functions were all normal, and the clamor of musical activities in this body of water was basically digested between the spacious water and sky. However, the journey to the next destination was much slower than expected. The problem lay with the new owner for this situation to occur. Luonan didn't express any opinion towards the replacement yacht, even though he hadn't had the time to modify the gentle wind layout of the lower deck living area. There was a clear difference from the previous yacht. For him, it was probably just a change of vehicle to sit and rest. Luonan, aside from the initial understanding of the latest situation in Ban City, placed all of his attention on the damaged monocle. Luonan said, "Let's first solve the current problem, then go find the corresponding materials." Then he spent a full 4 hours to repair the monocle to its original state. Moreover, he was still in the process of doing post-production tests. So Lu understood that the seemingly sparkling and transparent lens actually possessed an inconceivably complex structure, and an even more inconceivably complex manufacturing method. From Luonan's mouth, it was just an imaginary structure. It was a temporary mold that needed to consume large amounts of energy at all times. She really didn't know how harsh the requirements would be if she were to use the so-called creation method to create it. It was hard for Lu to guess Luonan's experimental plan, but she was already nervous. While Luonan was working, she had already made a round of phone calls with the relevant intermediaries and manufacturers of the destination. She had to understand the market and not fight an unprepared battle. Since this was a relatively professional field, Lu didn't know whether her efforts would ultimately be able to achieve her wishes. However, when the effort people put in overflowed, they would often obtain some benefits from other sources. As she continued to communicate in depth with the local circles of Ban City, some unexpected intelligence information, especially the parts related to the Great Marsh Order, came to light. More and more details and rumors were exposed. After organizing and analyzing the information, Lu felt that it was necessary to give Luonan another report. So she took the organized information and once again entered the living area on the lower deck of the ship. It was already nighttime. Natural lighting was no longer enough to support the illumination of the living area. The warm and harmonious lights lit up, illuminating the light-colored tatamas and the most classic wood color of the wind. The entire living area was covered in a layer of warm luster. It actually looked quite warm. It was said that this yacht belonged to the president of the Great Marsh Jusher Commune, Matsudaira Yoshio. That person was famous for being sharp and callous. His family life was a mystery, but who would have thought that he would approve of such a style? Oh, it was unexpectedly compatible with a certain someone. That certain someone was naturally Snake Tongue. This Northmont Yuehui was a curse master. She wore a traditional formal attire that matched the style of decoration in the living area. While Luonan was engrossed and Lu was busy, Snake Tongue wasn't assigned any tasks. She just stayed by Luonan's side. She poured tea, tidied up the layout of the cabin, and did some servant and attendant work. She actually knew quite a few things. When Lu arrived at the lower deck, she saw Snake Tongue kneeling in front of Luonan like a traditional Japanese woman from a TV series. She served him tea at a suitable temperature. Then she retreated with a kneeling posture. The room was extremely quiet. There was only the rustling of the moon-white kimono against the tatamis. It carried the rhythm and sound of life. Snake Tongue's head was lowered the entire time. From Inli's angle, she could only see her meticulously combed jet-black hair, as well as her snow-white neck and a small portion of her back muscles under the illumination of the warm light. Even so, it was enough to make people sigh in admiration. Humans naturally lacked resistance to smooth and exquisite textures. Plus, the person before her eyes was warm and vivid. She possessed an outstanding figure, and the beauty of her charm. She was nothing more than a living beauty. Inlo wanted to extend her finger over and test the feeling. But from Inli's perspective, the most moving aspect of Snake Tongue was that she was able to use her astonishing concentration to serve Luo Nan as he walked, sat and laid down. She carved out those seemingly meaningless details for the sake of perfection. In terms of efficiency, there was nothing to criticize. If a company or an organization did things like this, they would be finished sooner or later. But when it came to interpersonal relationships, this method of doing things manifested a pious and pure attitude. It was as if it didn't involve any calculations. It was a matter of course and right. The essence of this method was classical, traditional, and old-fashioned. It was the morality and aesthetics that the vast majority of men yearned for. Right now, Luo Nan was sprawled on the tatamis. He was dressed like a young man that could be found anywhere on the street. But Snake Tongue's posture was clearly that of serving a noble. What era was it now? What kind of person was Snake Tongue? It was clearly impossible for her to be that type of person, but she was able to perform flawlessly. She was able to move freely and smoothly. Even though Luo Nan didn't look her in the eye, she didn't display any dismay or slackness. She didn't show any signs of acting. She didn't show any signs of impatience from beginning to end. She did her best to avoid disturbing Luo Nan's train of thought. But she was like the warm soup of a spring. She seeped in through the minuscule details. She was everywhere. Both of them were experts in serving others. Inlu could understand how superb her methods were. She was ashamed of her inferiority. There was far too much observation and judgment involved. There might even be some high-level sensing abilities involved. She really is a terrifying woman. Inlu sighed silently. She had placed an extraordinary amount of attention on Snake Tongue. To put it bluntly, it was because some sort of competitive crisis had turned into reality. The position of a secretary was far too easy to replace, especially a personal secretary. But then again, if one didn't care about the cost factor, what did it matter if there were one or two secretaries who could do things and were pleasing to the eye? Direct competition was stupid. It was far too normal for a person like Luo Nan to have people by his side. And the key to being dependents was that they each had a clear role. At the very least, they had certain functions. The value of a secretary was to deal with problems for the boss, not to cause trouble. Inlu was aware of this point when she became Mrs. Halder's secretary. Inlu adjusted her breathing and took off her shoes in the outer room. She arranged them neatly and quietly walked onto the tatami. Luo Nan was still deep in thought right now. She wasn't stupid enough to disturb his train of thought. She just knelt in a corner of the room and waited silently. Of course, Snake Tongue noticed her. She quietly moved over and brewed some fragrant tea for her. She silently offered it to her. Her posture was still humble, as if she were the lowliest of maids. Inlu suppressed the slight uneasiness in her heart and bowed in thanks. Snake Tongue's courtesy toward Luo Nan was something she couldn't bear. This sort of deliberate respect was perhaps the hidden edge of Snake Tongue. Time passed by in tranquility, second by second. Nearly 40 minutes passed by, and Luo Nan, who had been competing with the monocle floating in front of him all this time, finally let out a long sigh. Then he stretched his body. It was probably because he was more relaxed in the quiet space. He fell straight back and stretched his arms and legs properly on the tatami. His back rubbed against the tatami, and he wanted to do another roll. And at this time, Luo Nan finally broke away from his pure ego state. The true environment of his surroundings was reflected into his heart. He let out a sigh and hurriedly propped his upper body up. He was unable to conceal the childishness that had been suppressed to his bones no matter what. Luonan was a bit embarrassed, but he soon discovered that the other two people in the room were maintaining proper sitting postures. Their eyes were drooping and their eyebrows were lowered. They didn't speak or move. They were like two statues. Forget it. He would just pretend that they didn't see it. Luonan grinned and straightened his body. He pondered over what he should say. Snake Tongue, who was not far from him, walked forward on her knees. She arrived behind him and extended her hand to touch his shoulder. After a brief pause, she began to knead with a technique of appropriate weight. Luonan instinctively slumped his shoulders, but he didn't take the next step in the end. He turned his head to look at Snake Tongue. This cursemancer, who was well known in the industry, was a dignified B-rank expert. Her expression was tranquil. She didn't say anything at all. She just concentrated on the tapping and kneading of her palms. It was as if everything was natural and right. Well, her technique was quite good. At least Luonan, who lacked experience in this field, felt quite comfortable. This was the case from his body to his mind. Luonan possessed the ability to pry into the desires of the human heart and control the mind and soul. But at this moment, he discovered that all of the fundamental changes didn't need external help. They all came from himself. Unknowingly, it was as if a layer of cushion had been placed in the bottom of his heart. Or perhaps it was some sort of stepping stone. He easily and skillfully stepped into a mental zone that he had never set foot in before. Perhaps he had observed and imagined from the outside before. He had a bit of unspoken yearning, but he had never experienced it with his own body like he did now. His heart was filled with a feeling that it was natural and right. The structure of the format pyramid, the authority of the closed system, and more directly, his absolute control over Snake Tongue determined the current state and structure. He could accept it. He could call a halt. But no matter what, he possessed the absolute right to choose. Calling a halt. It was quite comfortable. Why did he have to stop? A smile naturally overflowed from the corner of Luonan's lips. His body slightly swayed under Snake Tongue's perfect technique. His throat was tainted with a bit of a lazy rhythm. Tell me, what's the new situation? What a warm pool of living water. Inla maintained her lowered posture, but her mind was in a trance. Luckily, the tempo of the atmosphere in the room had completely relaxed. Her absent-mindedness wasn't obvious, and she quickly came back to her senses and responded. Sir, there's information that the Great Zay Order is hastily liquidating their assets because the dark dragon god they worship has escaped. Chapter 804. Dark Dragon God? Luonan blinked. What's that? This is one of the water gods in the traditional myths of Ban City. Is there a supernatural god in Sokka? I remember that after the era of distortion, the conversion rate of the various civilizations and religions was very impressive. Hiss, I can use a little more strength on my spine. Snake Tongue remained silent. She just responded with more strength. She needed to satisfy Luonan. At the same time, she was quietly observing Luonan. After all, this was the first time she had been in contact with Luonan for a long time in the real world. She was close to the truest image of Luonan. She was very different from the oppressive force of the powerful ruler of the cloud world. She needed to experience, combine, and revise. Luonan was able to sense the intent of this secret observation, and he let Snake Tongue do it. He enjoyed Snake Tongue's service very much, but this didn't mean that he would put on the stinky airs of a superior. If he liked it, then he liked it. If he was comfortable, then he was comfortable. Similarly, when it came to intellectual information, if he didn't know it, then he didn't know it. If he was interested, then he was interested. Under Luonan's lead, Inlu unconsciously entered the role of a teacher. In any case, she had done her homework beforehand. She opened the virtual workspace and displayed the collected information. She highlighted the key points. This involves the root of the supernatural power of the church's shrines in Osaka. According to the Shinto tradition of Osaka City, the Ozawa Shrine was not the main shrine that worshipped the dark dragon god. According to them, they worshipped the dark dragon god's desolation, which they had invited from the main shrine. It represented the god's violent and brave form, probably similar to the evil doppelganger. So, to be exact, the dark dragon god Desolate Soul has a different appearance and godly power from the dark dragon god in the legends. This difference is very important. Sakura City's Shinto tradition was rather complicated. Inlo only gave a brief introduction, and that wasn't the main point. She switched the interface again, and in the virtual workspace, a comparison chart of the gods she worshipped appeared at the right time. The dark dragon god was a more traditional image of an ancient dragon of the East. There were some changes, but it was still acceptable. But the appearance of famine on the other side was more absurd. Oh what? What shocked Luo Nan was a rather malevolent monster. Its overall silhouette looked like that of a water buffalo, but its forelimbs were more like the limbs of an insect. They were sharp and twisted. Its body was crouching low, and its posture was more like that of a spider. The appearance of this famine soul is similar to the ox ghost of the ancient island chain's legends. It is a type of demon. But here, demons and gods are often exchanged, so it is easy for the common people to accept it. Of course, this isn't some kind of demon. It's a type of mutant species that exists around Ban City. The mutant biologists here still name it ox demon, probably to fit in with Ban City's traditions. They are active in the coastal area of Ban City and belong to the aquatic species. However, they often follow the river to the northern mountains to hunt. Most of them come and go alone. They have a large range of activities and are very dangerous. Mutants and deities. Sounds familiar. Luo Nan felt that this part was a bit familiar. He gently shook his head under Snake Tongue's kneading as he searched through his memories. Oh right. Sister Yuan told me about it before. It was a series of general knowledge classes arranged by the Xia City branch shortly after he entered the Inner World Circle. Yuan was talking about the world order in and out of the psychic wave network. The main content was about the distribution of power between the inner world and the mortal world, as well as the series of bright and dark rules during operation. He did mention a few things about the situation in Bancheng. Inla stopped. Then, keep talking, especially about the mutual achievement between mutants and deities. It should be this. I've pretty much forgotten about it. Yes. Inla took a deep breath. She made slight adjustments according to Luo Nan's demarcated scope and continued her explanation. The background of the so-called mutual achievement is this. After the arrival of the era of mutants, Bancheng was built upon the ruins. It became the only large-scale city on the archipelago, and it basically inherited the culture of the archipelago. However, a few years before the appearance of supernatural powers, the tradition of the divine path didn't seem to possess the soil to produce mortal powers. This continued until a certain ability user who came from a traditional shrine and possessed an extreme factor of madness did an inconceivable experiment. Of course, it was possible that his mind had suddenly gone insane. He used the god sacrifice ritual to directly connect his own deity with a powerful mutant that was wreaking havoc around the archipelago at the time. He prostrated himself in worship, and the connection was truly realized. He received feedback, forming a sort of symbiotic relationship. Because of this, many of the secular clergy members of that shrine became ability users in a single leap. No matter how absurd the cause was, in the end, it opened a door to the extraordinary level for the traditional power of the divine path in Bancheng. Admittedly, the era of mutants was a place where demons danced wildly, but it was more in line with the tradition of the divine path, which had always had faith in animism. Mountains, rocks, plants, birds, beasts, and even the resentment of souls could all become spirits and monsters. There was a foundation for the masses. There was a foundation of faith from over 100 million people. There was substantial feedback from supernatural powers. It was reasonable for this system to grow larger and stronger. Thus, the surrounding orders of Bancheng flourished greatly. All kinds of shrines were erected in great numbers, becoming the famous city of myriad gods. Luo Nan nodded his head over and over as he listened. Now I remember. Mutant birds, beasts, plants, and trees were used as deities. They should be used as the sustenance of a specific collection of imagination. If the mental plane possesses the rule of configuration, Then there are mutants possessing supernatural powers as platforms and carriers. It is possible to realize a leap from 0 to 1. Therefore, as long as the basic conditions are met, the forms of supernatural powers are very flexible. Mr. is right. Inlu agreed and continued speaking. It's just that the system of the divine path of Bansheng also has an enormous flaw. Those so-called gods were still aberrations at the root. Most of them have yet to be rid of their wild nature. Some are muddle-headed, while others are sinister and savage. It isn't easy to consecrate them and use them for a long period of time. Some small orders, such as the Temo Shrine, often suffer backlash because of this. Their system collapses. The shrine that was the first to eat crabs has long since been annihilated and forgotten. Although there are many orders in Bansheng, only the Amaterasu order has truly become popular. It isn't the traditional path of the divine path. Luonan laughed. The Blood Flame order was an ideal order. They had their own sense of superiority. It was normal for them to not be used to the wild zen of Bansheng. The three great secret orders, the Order of Justice, the Amaterasu order, and the Eye of Secret Contract, had never given their position of deity to others. The Order of Justice was considered the most special. They possessed the factor of worshipping holy objects, but they also carried out the concept of complete logic. They used pure rules as a key link, and they possessed the ability to materialize. Creating something out of nothing seemed illusory, but it was actually the most stable. Luonan suddenly thought of something. He turned his head and smiled at Snake Tongue. Your myriad spirit order is too casual. Their sacrificial rites and incantations are all over the place. They lack sincerity. I've made a fool of myself in front of my lord. Snake Tongue was calm. Although she was born in Bansheng, a lineage of the divine path that could be called pure law, her natural disposition was callous. She didn't have any protective heart. She just used Bansheng as a bunker, and the myriad spirit order was the outer cover of the bunker. It was fine as long as it had an appearance. If she had 1/10 of the concentration she spent on the massage today, the myriad spirit order would have a different appearance. Luonan was just speaking without thinking. He indicated for Inlu to continue explaining. Inlu changed the page of the virtual work area, focusing once more on the Great Zay Order. The Great Zay Order is quite mature compared to the other mediocre Temo Shrine. It is said that the Dark Dragon God Wilderness soul they consecrate, the Great Zay Order, has gradually grown in wisdom over the past few decades. Its spirituality is quite high, and it can even communicate with people. But it is precisely because of this that its reactions are more uncertain. According to the information, I have basically reconstructed the situation from last night. Here is an example that is more tragic than the Great Zay Order. There is a Honda shrine to the west of Bansheng. It belongs to the Temo Shrine, a branch of a branch. It mainly consecrates the Leech Child God and its soul. Its influence is small. It is this Leech Child God's avatar that was hijacked by the Amaterasu order last night. The entire order system collapsed in an instant, and 3 priests of various levels died on the spot. This is the first confirmed victim of the Amaterasu order's operation this time. But basically no one has mentioned it. The 2 shrines of Honda and Great Zay have always been publicly recognized as having a close relationship. It is extremely likely that the Dark Dragon God Wilderness Soul was frightened by the unforeseen event at Honda Shrine. It left Bansheng far away, and no one knows where it fled to. Luonan furrowed his brows. So the Great Zay Order sold off a large amount of assets to flee with their own god. Is there something wrong with this? Yes. I feel that this decision was made too hastily. Inla focused the information page on a certain man who looked very casual and confident. The number 2 figure of the Great Zay Order is Matsudaira Yoshio, who currently presides over the affairs of the order. It is said that he is a very shrewd person. He has been doing very well in Bansheng these past few years. It is hard to imagine that he would sell off his assets in such a hurry. But it is also possible that he received other information. We need further information to support this. Luonan shook his head. The Great Zay Order was just a small detail in the overall situation of Bansheng. He paid more attention to the situation of the Amaterasu order. So what if they are from other orders and shrines? The Honda Shrine and the Great Zay Order are already in this state. Don't they have the slightest bit of sympathy? Can they still hold on? The dark dragon god ran away. So what if there are other so-called gods? A voice suddenly interrupted Yin Lu as she was preparing her words. There won't be any changes. Snake Tongue just happened to pinch the back of Luo Nan's neck. She moved closer and spoke in a soft voice. Her warm breath was extremely pleasant. Luo Nan's neck turned slightly along with the moderate strength of her fingers. He asked without thinking, why? The orders and shrines of Banqing have long since gotten used to living under the control of the Amaterasu order. It's just like how the common people are used to making a living under the shadow of a giant corporation. Some people are muddle-headed. Some people have some experiences, but they aren't willing to think deeply about it. Some people have thoughts of struggling, but they don't have the strength to struggle. Under such a general trend, 99% of the people will maintain their established path and complete the role they were given. This is tradition. This is also the basic rule of living within. Even if they are destined to be dealt with tomorrow, they will still have to compare the result of being dealt with and the result of violating the rules. Which one is more miserable? In the end, most of their choices will still be carried out according to the established rules. Her warm voice and soft words revealed a sense of coolness and indifference. It made Luo Nan raise his eyebrows. They can't even muster the thought of resisting? Why would they resist? Snake Tongue laughed softly. The appearance of the god path of Banqing can deceive ordinary people. But who doesn't know what's going on when it comes to ability users? The various orders and shrines can only use the name of one spirit for souls to cover up and deceive themselves. It can be said that the tradition of the god path has already become a deformed monster after entering the age of distortion. For the sake of obtaining supernatural strength, people think of every way possible to support and please those ignorant and violent mutants. These rules themselves don't possess the value of maintaining them. For many people, the Amaterasu Order's nation of gods is more interesting than the tradition of the god path that has gone astray. Nation of gods? Luo Nan heard a new term and asked subconsciously. Snake Tongue seemed to believe that she had already said too much as a maid. She smiled slightly and her gaze shifted to Yin Lu. Yin Lu received this favor with a smile. Of course, everything was built on the foundation of doing her homework. She flipped to a new page of information and displayed a tree diagram. The Amaterasu Order has been promoting the so-called Nation of Divine Treasures for the past few years. They say that the Fusang Divine Tree, constructed by true gods, has 10 parallel suns, each divine treasure. Each divine treasure is a world, and each world is the dwelling place of the gods. Aside from the supreme gods, there are also clones, souls, and auxiliary gods that reside there. Their ranks are clearly distinguished. Luo Nan instantly understood. These seats are all reserved for the shrines of the orders of Banqing. Exactly. In recent years, the Amaterasu Order has viewed Banqing more and more as a forbidden land. Perhaps they want to establish a nation of gods system on the foundation of the city of myriad gods. It is similar to the tradition of the god path of Banqing, but it is actually different. It is very much in line with the cultural traditions here. As for what will happen after harvesting these mutant gods, it is hard to guess right now. Snake Tongue's fingertip streaked across the back of Luo Nan's neck. She continued to speak softly and slowly. She added, "There is no need for a reason under power. But if there really is one, then the people of Banqing will be quite satisfied. So it's like this." Luo Nan responded with a single sound. Then he narrowed his eyes and spoke no more. It seemed that he was pondering, but it also seemed that he was simply enjoying Snake Tongue's technique. His mind was absent-minded and he didn't know where to go. This period of silence lasted for an especially long time. Normally, Yin Li's mental fortitude was lacking. However, Snake Tongue was present before her eyes. She more or less had a competitive streak in her heart. She saw that Snake Tongue was humble and calm when she accompanied Luo Nan. Yin Li didn't want to fall behind. She secretly learned from Snake Tongue, and out of nowhere, she gained a tranquil air. She endured through the most unbearable period of time. The cabin returned to silence. Only the soft sound of the ripples of the ship traveling at low speeds could be faintly heard. It gave the warm cabin a layer of coolness. Nearly 40 minutes had passed by the time Luo Nen opened his mouth again. He let out a sigh of emotion. Bansheng doesn't have the psychic wave network, but the overall structure of the mental domain is quite lively. Sure enough, each place has its own custom. Inli's somewhat stiff mind suddenly woke up. Sir, are you referring to? I'm talking about the surrounding environment of the mental sea. You've listened to my lessons, right? Yes. The madam has requested that everyone in the order from top to bottom repeatedly research and study it. Ha ha ha, there's no need to be so exaggerated. Luo Nan's body and mental state grew more and more relaxed under Snake Tongue's exquisite technique. He laughed and waved his hand. It's fine as long as you know a few words that I forcefully named. I'm talking about Bansheng. Normally, the mental sea is chaotic and orderly. As the cage bubbles are born and extinguished, there is a relatively clear trend. It gathers towards a few relatively solid existences. Some of the gatherings are arranged in a very orderly manner, layer upon layer of accumulation and operation. Some are done especially well. They make full use of the accumulation of believers. Even those who don't have the qualifications to enter the Overlook Abyss district can make contact and probe in, using some of the power there. This is the meaning behind the existence of a large number of orders and shrines. Looking purely from the usage of supernatural powers, the atmosphere here is actually better than that of Xia City. It's more efficient, and it has more configurational thinking. However, it's a lot less independent. It's all the same. There aren't too many surprises. It lacks the power of barbaric growth. It's like something in a petri dish. Yeah, if you zoom in a bit more, it's like a greenhouse. This must be the most authoritative review from the perspective of configuration. Right? Inlu memorized these words in her heart. She pondered a few times, and she suddenly realized something. Sir, are you saying that there are people deliberately guiding and cultivating here? Is it the Amaterasu order? But they've only been established for 20 to 30 years. The deformities of the divine path and the mutual achievement of each other happened even earlier. It doesn't matter who planted them. They're harvesting them anyway. No, it's like the ingredients for the meal have already been prepared and put into the pot. They can be done right away, but someone interferes midway. Let's not even talk about the operation being halted. The duck that was about to enter the mouth has flown away. TSK. It seems like I'm the reason? Ha, the Luo family's sandwich domain. It doesn't seem easy to explain. In short, it's a continuous effect caused by the interference of space and time. If the Amaterasu order has really delayed their operation because of the turbulence of space and time, then I'm most likely involved. If they catch me, I'm afraid they'll fight me to the death. Amidst Luo Nan's loud laughter, Snake Tongue's kneading motion paused for a moment. Inlu cast her gaze over, but she didn't dare to linger on Luo Nan's face. She just met Snake Tongue's gaze, and she looked away at the same time. At this moment, Inli's heartbeat sped up. It was as if there was a line of sight shining over from the Amaterasu Pure Land in the outer seas of Ban City. No matter what the situation was, going against extraordinaries would never make things easy for them. However, Inlu recalled the miraculous movie viewing experience she had a few days ago. The extremely close angle of view caused her to have a sort of misconception. Actually, I've done it with extraordinaries a long time ago. Her taut mind suddenly relaxed. She raised her head and saw Snake Tongue calmly and peacefully continuing her massage. What a shrewd woman. Inlu didn't want to fall behind. At the very least, she couldn't lose to Snake Tongue. She controlled her emotions, and her train of thought gradually became clear. She took the initiative to open her mouth and ask. Mr. Luo said in his lecture that contact is invasion in the sea of consciousness. We don't dare to make wild guesses about Mr. Luo's realm. However, Ban City is the headquarters of the Amaterasu order. Can the mental senses of those two extraordinaries probe and search? It's basically impossible right now because it's chaotic enough. Luo Nan twisted his neck, but it caused the muscles and bones of the lower half of his body to make faint sounds. His muscles, bones, and skin constantly adjusted their positions and states, gradually matching the changes of the Luo clan's sandwich domain. Speaking of which, Snake Tongue's massage technique was truly brilliant. After a new round of imbalance between body and soul, it was quite rare to see such smooth fine adjustments that didn't require extra effort. It was as if something that had always been missing had been filled up. A distorted link had been unraveled, even if it was only a temporary phenomenon. Soon, the chaos in the overall structure of the domain masked these changes. Luo Nan's sandwich domain was in a state of conflict and interference at all times. In terms of degree, it was far more serious than when he was bedridden due to a serious illness. It was just that he already understood the technique of diverting disaster. Plus, his foundation was solid, and the expanded space of his domain was sufficiently vast. The layered laws were complex and flexible. Only then did he have the leeway to buffer the changes. He didn't dig himself in. Right now it was quite difficult to completely straighten things out. He had to expend a great deal of energy to adjust dynamically from time to time. If someone from the outside came over, they would probably be taken into outer space by the chaotic structure of space and time. It was no wonder that the Amaterasu order wanted to stop. The space-time environment of Ban City, the environment of the Mental Sea, and the environment of the Abyss region weren't obvious on the whole. But Luo Nan had messed up the details, causing the variables to increase dramatically. No one wanted to suddenly cut off the fire and air while they were cooking soup. Then a cockroach would jump out of nowhere. Under normal circumstances, even if there were 10 extraordinaries gathered together, this sort of situation wouldn't occur. From the standpoint of the Amaterasu order, Luo Nan would certainly suspect that someone was purposely causing trouble. It really wasn't on purpose. I can't return to Xia City for some time before I take care of this. Otherwise, I'll be confessing without being pressed. This is a headache. Luo Nan had yet to find a new and relatively stable body and soul coupling mode. This interference effect of messing up the state of space and time would not disappear. From this perspective, it would be good if the Amaterasu order could find him. He could communicate with them and sort out the messy structure clearly. The more Luo Nan thought about it, the more absurd it became. He unconsciously laughed. The more he relaxed, the more Yin Lu reflected. I've been acting in a high-profile manner in Ban City these past few days. It's a bit inappropriate. My identity and financial channels can't be hidden from people with intentions. With the current sensitivity of the Amaterasu order, if I follow the clues, I'll be able to find some clues about my whereabouts. Also, there are many people in the market we're going to. Shouldn't we? It doesn't matter. You're here. You have a completely unrelated relationship. They won't think of me. Luo Nan looked at Snake Tongue. Look. This is a good example. We can learn from it. Snake Tongue's wide sleeves hung down. She used her palms to exert force on Luo Nan's shoulder blade. Most of her body stuck to Luo Nan. She looked quite forceful, but her breath was light. It was gentle and drawn out. Even her voice was soft and sweet-sounding. It's nothing more than a plot made by relying on the yarn of concealment. It's just a small trick. It can't enter your discerning eyes. But right now you need to deceive people. Why don't you take this object? What a pretentious fox. Yin Li's eyes drooped as she cursed silently. Then she heard Luo Nan respond with a careless tone. There's no need. But I can study it and learn from it. After coming back, the only thing worth analyzing with the lens is the 2 scarves you're wearing. Oh, you still haven't connected them together? I've tried a few times. The 2 seem to be made by nature. I can't find a place to start. That's normal. I've done a rough study before. The structure of these 2 scarves is special. The materials are special. The manufacturing method is special as well. It's a strange object that truly possesses the level of creation. Luo Nan naturally compared the equipment on his body. The biochemical reactor that he had just snatched a few days ago was a defective product. Its functions were different as well. It was hard to make a direct comparison, but from the blueprints stored in the virtual brain system, Luo Nan could tell that Luo Nan's technology was robust, and that the manufacturing was precise. Luo Nan's ingenious design seemed to be inferior in some aspects. The divine binding hoop he obtained from Jin Tong was roughly at this level as well. Only the external neuron, which carried the virtual brain system, was a notch higher in terms of unpredictability. Of course, this was just the opinion of a rookie who had just begun learning creation. He needed to conduct in-depth research before he could come to a conclusion. His thoughts reached this point, and the monocle appeared out of thin air. It stuck to Luo Nan's left eye. Actually, this wasn't a necessary step to use it, but didn't life need a bit of a sense of ritual? Specific small movements could help the user carry out psychological suggestions, allowing them to concentrate their mind more effectively. At the same time, it could also affect the target. Just like Snake Tongue right now. Due to Luo Nan's direct gaze and the influence of the refracted light, her phantom image was reflected on the lens of the monocle. It interweaved with the color of Luo Nan's pupils, forming a treacherous silhouette of light and shadow. There was clearly an unexplainable and irresistible power swirling within. Snake Tongue wanted to lower her head and avoid Luo Nan's gaze completely out of instinct. But in the next second, her lower jaw tightened slightly. Luo Nan had actually pinched it with his fingers. She was unable to lower it by even a bit. Then there was a force that stretched forward. Snake Tongue subconsciously let out a light cry. She was forced to raise her chin and move a few centimeters forward on her knees. The production of this movement was very abrupt, but it was also very normal. The distance between the two was very close, but one was in front and one was behind. Luo Nan needed to turn his head to look. The angle wasn't comfortable, so he naturally had to adjust after pinching Snake Tongue's chin. Fortunately, Snake Tongue's body was soft. She was like a beautiful snake wrapped in a kimono. She stuck to Luo Nan's back, arms and knees, twisting over bit by bit. Her arms were barely able to support herself on the tatami, and she maintained a kneeling posture. Finally, she faced Luo Nan face to face. The distance between the two grew even closer. It was so close that it was extremely ambiguous for a man and a woman. Luo Nan should feel uncomfortable. At least, he thought he would feel like this. It was this thought that proved that Luo Nan's current state of mind was different from before. In the past, Luo Nan's mind was basically free of distracting thoughts when he was conducting research and exploration. 1 was 1. 2 was 2. There was no room for other elements to intervene. But this time his mind wasn't too pure. Snake Tongue's humble and intimate movements caused subtle changes in his mind. This continued for several dozen minutes. Luo Nan believed that he had gotten used to it, but a slight change in angle was actually able to bring about a whole new level of stimulation. A single excessive movement or even thought brought about a chain reaction. Luo Nan didn't have any decent analysis in his mind for a short period of time after Snake Tongue finished adjusting her posture. Instead, he received daily information from Xie Junping and his group of bad friends, which was exclusive to men, and it surged into his mind. It could be said without hiding anything that Luo Nan had similar thoughts in the past when he faced Cat Eyes, Zhang Yingying, and even He Yuan. It was just that this was a normal physiological and psychological reaction. As long as he considered their friendship and mutual respect, he wouldn't think further down the line. If he had a sense of morality, a sense of shame, or something like that, then perhaps it would be useful. But Snake Tongue was different. She had a completely subdued posture. She used to be his enemy. She had an irreversible difference in status within the system. Luo Nan had never come into contact with the opposite sex in reality. Moreover, he didn't feel any pressure to communicate with her, so there was a subtle feeling of unreality. She was clearly a lively and fragrant woman, but she was like a character in a movie or a character in a game. She conformed to the aesthetic, but she didn't conform to the psychological reality. However, Snake Tongue was real. His fingers were still pinching Snake Tongue's lower jaw. There were a few minute movements as he gently stroked her smooth skin, experiencing the texture and contours of her skin and bones. There were some false elements of the effects of the muslin of concealment, but this wasn't the main point. The main point was that this method directly probed into the depths of Snake Tongue's heart. There was also the subtle feedback. Luo Nan was able to capture Snake Tongue's immediate psychological reaction. She was subdued, humble, and a deeper layer of fear and awareness. All of this was mixed together under her docile attitude. From beginning to end, it was as if she was a dense warm mist of water vapor. She silently endured everything, and she naturally dispelled the necessary reaction force. It doesn't matter what I do, she won't refuse. In-lo won't stop me. Right now, she was in a very awkward situation. She was in a dilemma. She and the others have considered the problems and made preparations far more than I have. Luonen had always been a sharp person. He just didn't ponder deeper into things. He didn't waste his thoughts and energy. But right now there were some thoughts and thoughts deep within his heart. They were like a primeval forest after a heavy rain. Plants and vines wildly grew and spread. Right now, Luonen didn't know what kind of expression he should display. The collapse of his mental barriers combined with his shallow experience allowed his face to maintain a tranquil or wooden state. He completely obliterated the uneasiness from his new experiences. His thoughts dominated everything as if it were a matter of course. Emotions and thoughts cause changes in the body. Perhaps it would be more accurate to reverse the cause and effect relationship. Luonen had the ability to sense the more detailed things within his body, but he no longer had the mind to delve into them. He just felt strange and a bit awkward. But he felt more comfortable. Extremely comfortable. Whether it was the rise and fall of his blood energy or the circulation of his thoughts, everything was free and smooth. He really liked this state. Of course he liked it a lot. Next. Luonan's finger was about to move down, but he had already let his fingertips streak across the tender flesh under Snake Tongue's lower jaw, moving down along her neck. Snake Tongue's lower jaw didn't have the strength to support it, but she still maintained her original posture. She didn't move at all, allowing her fragile and slender neck to be exposed. It was a posture that defied the instincts of living creatures. It was as if she was displaying an attitude of stretching out her neck to be slaughtered. However, her calm and gentle aura carried a devout awareness. It was just like this. It perfectly conformed to the positioning system of the format pyramid. It made all of Luonan's movements possess the righteousness and dignity of a monarch bestowed by God. Justice on the intrinsic plane and stimulation on the perceptual plane fused together. Luonan didn't have any reason to stop. Bang! The radiance suddenly flashed within his brain. It was as if friction brought forth wind, sweeping the surging emotions into a dark corner. The grayish-white radiance from the virtual brain's interface was relatively dim, but the information it brought possessed an overwhelming sense of existence. Luonan was stunned for a moment. The mast of reason reappeared amidst the tide of emotions and instincts in his mind. He rapidly outlined the complete outline of the boat of logic within his habitual thinking that had accumulated over the years. What did I do when I pinched Snake Tongue's lower jaw earlier? Analyze the gauze of concealment. Analyze it. He didn't do anything. On the other hand, in the virtual brain interface, another new element had appeared after the night-level internal colonization basic biochemical reactor. It wasn't the gauze of concealment. It was the gauze of concealment plus the gauze of silence. These two strange objects existed within Snake Tongue's body at the same time. It was said that they once belonged to one body. The virtual brain's interface clearly verified this point. The image of the two pieces of fine yarn in the virtual brain's interface was like two interweaving and coiling wisps of green smoke. They could fuse into a ball at any time. But upon closer inspection, no matter how much they interweaved and changed, they were still distinct and not the slightest bit chaotic. More importantly, the interface showed that the analysis progress had already crossed 15%. This was an astonishing speed. It was much faster than Jin Tong's psychic light seed. It seemed to be a level higher than the biochemical reactor. Half a year ago, he had analyzed the biochemical reactor from Li Yiwei's body and found its true appearance. He had spent a total of 40 minutes. Looking at the current situation, he might be able to solve the problem in less than 20 minutes. Oh, maybe 10 minutes? Luonan had done a lot of research, and he had a basic understanding of the analysis mode of the external neuron. The biochemical reactor had an extremely fast analysis speed. The database already had the corresponding information. All he needed to do was to search for it. Jin Tong's psychic light seed belonged to the electromagnetic configuration category. Even though there were differences in Jin Tong's personal style and details, the general structure and outline remained the same. The analysis speed wasn't slow either. For instance, the Bloodsoul Temple, Emoluan, and Yuan X clearly didn't exist in the database. They could only start from the beginning, and they were often stuck in progress. Luonan needed his own understanding to be in place in order to advance faster. As for the Wraith sign, its system structure conflicted. Basically, there was no need to think about it. Clearly, the yarn of concealment and the yarn of silence belonged to the biochemical reactor's situation. However, this pair of strange objects was clearly on Snake Tongue's body. Luonan didn't deliberately use interference waves to sense and detect them. The virtual brain system had already analyzed them, and they were naturally incorporated into Luonan's own system. Their ownership was clear. This is because Snake Tongue has already been captured by me. She has entered the great production line of formatting theory. She is a believer, so she belongs to me by default. Even the treasures on her body are mine? This way of thinking was pretty good. It was in line with the inclination of the human heart. Luonan no longer had any further thoughts. The rapid progress of the analysis was urging him to get down to business. If he were to continue, his thoughts would go crooked. He let out a silent sigh and pulled his hand back. It's fine. Snake Tongue finally revealed an astonished expression. Inlo, who was kneeling far away, was the same. The emotions in their hearts were much more complicated than their outward expressions. I can see it just by being here. Luonan gave a careless explanation. This explanation was nonsense, and the awkwardness that had disappeared all this time finally seeped out. He didn't really like this feeling. He let out a low cough and furrowed his brows. We need to do research today. We definitely won't be going to the market. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Yes. Inlo and Snake Tongue responded as one. Their tacit understanding was complete. But what should they do next? How should they spend the night? These two extremely scheming women were at a loss for a time. Luonan didn't have these worries because the virtual brain interface lit up with a red warning light at this moment. A pop-up window that had not appeared for a long time jumped out. Back when Luonan first came into contact with the virtual brain system, the continuous pop-up windows gave Luonan a certain psychological shadow. He deliberately changed the settings after he gained a basic understanding of the system. There was only one pop-up window right now, and it was just a string of flowing information. It was the language of a mysterious and unknown civilization. These words had already become the core of Luonan's formatting theory system. The general meaning of these words was already clear. Target architecture analysis complete. Corresponding data exists in the database. Establishing file index. Heaven Abyss code ********. Heaven Stairway Level 4. Specialized Spirit Core Production for Lamination Interference. Designer. Name, XX. Internal information. Not public. Chapter 805. TSK. It was true. The muslin of concealment and the muslin of silence were both products of a mysterious civilization. They were of the same origin as the divine binding hoop. However, the shape was more or less outside of Luonan's expectations. This sort of fabric-type object could be considered a spirit core? Though Luonan could borrow the marvelous power of the secret glyph to make wild guesses, his foundation was lacking in the end. He really could not understand the series of coding rules and characters on it. However, he could faintly understand the meaning of the name of the designer and the person who named it. According to the concepts of Earth, the first character roughly had the meaning of pillar or pillar. The second character felt like it had the meaning of seclusion or a house. How did he translate it? Liang. Liang-in? Beam house. Liang-lu? That's it. It was more pleasing to the eye to translate it to Liang-lu. Luonan felt a sense of accomplishment as a translator, but this feeling soon vanished like smoke in a puff of smoke. It didn't matter what he translated this person's name into, and it didn't matter who Liang-lu was. The rapid analysis progress suddenly came to a halt when this piece of information appeared. The index had been established, and the direction was very clear. However, The corresponding information could not be opened at all. Luonan obviously noticed the words non-public, but he didn't think much of it in the beginning. After all, the external neuron was in his hands. What did it matter if it was internal or not? It looked like the situation was not simple at all. The progress stopped for approximately half a minute. Probably because the internal logic had taken a detour. A new round of information finally appeared in the window. Warning! Search content exceeds basic database access. The system has automatically initiated access detection procedures. Luonan's eyelids twitched twice. He captured the words access, detection, and so on. He instinctively had a bad premonition. He subconsciously consoled himself. The more restricted the information was, the more precious it should be, right? The virtual brain system followed the established settings strictly, conducting core configuration nature detection. Core configuration fusion type replacement process detected. Temporary ownership change completed. Access detection complete. Holder's current access. Ownership, temporary. Knowledge search, expert level, pending detection. Resource transfer, sergeant rank, pending detection. Heaven Abyss Network, none not connected. Warning, holder's access is insufficient. Index has been erased. The corresponding information has entered special protection procedures. Hey, Luonan blurted out, attracting the attention of Snake Tongue and Yin Lu. But he did not know it at all. He simply pressed the virtual brain system with his telepathic thoughts. But after a round of operations, not just progress, even the information about Liang Lu in the pop-up window and the images of the Veil of Stealth and the Veil of Silence that he had mostly parsed were wiped clean. It was as if nothing had happened. What the hell is temporary? Luonan laughed in anger. It had been more than half a year since Luonan obtained the external neuron. Only today did Luonan realize that he was just a temporary holder. What if he met the real owner one day? Would he be able to break out of his head and return it to its rightful owner with a wave of his hand? Luo Zhongheng, my dear father, this is the present you gave your son for his birthday. But Luonan's smile was real. The external neuron was not impressive, and so was the virtual brain system. However, it was exactly because they were impressive that they appeared too profound and mysterious. The knowledge contained in it seemed like he would never be able to finish studying it in his lifetime. Luonan worked extremely hard, but even though he swallowed and digested the information inside in large gulps, the water level didn't seem to drop at all. He was still unable to find traces that belonged exclusively to his parents and grandfather. And now, the sudden restriction had caused him some trouble, but it also indicated a certain trend. Luonan touched the core portion of the external neuron. He had inadvertently touched upon clues and directions. How about I do it all over again? Luonan's thoughts wandered through the virtual brain's interface, which had already been cleaned by the special protection program. He absolutely didn't mind doing a few more rounds of testing. In this sort of situation, let alone a few rounds, he would be happy to go through a few hundred rounds. The external neuron was more direct than he imagined. A new pop-up window popped up in the next second. Its priority had already exceeded the system settings that Luonan had specially modified. This was because it carried a must-do option. Do you want to start the confirmation and review process? Review? This word was quite tyrannical. Could it be that the translation was the fault of the system? The smile on Luonan's lips became even more obvious. Even if the system gave him the opportunity to choose yes or no, he only had one path. He had to dig out the secrets of the external neuron. He had to trace the past of his grandfather, his parents, and the one who might have died, but there was still a faint hope. He couldn't say it. It wouldn't work if he said it. Luonan forcefully severed his thoughts and took a deep breath. The flexible e-ink screen, the external neuron, the virtual brain system. He proceeded layer by layer. What would come next? He stabbed his mind and directly chose yes. The virtual brain's interface's stagnant state completely shattered, and the information window refreshed once more. Confirmation and review process initiated. The owner's genetic data has not been entered into the database. Automatically transferred to the 100-year sequence. The general education level testing system has been activated. Results have been queried. Results are being entered. Hold on. Results? When did I ever answer a test? That's not right. I answered it, but it was clearly marked with the word simulation. It was used for practice. Clearly, the virtual brain system and the confirmation and review process would not wait for him. They would not listen to his explanation. The results of the evaluation came out half a second later. Cultural department. Results none. Results none. Results none. Results none. Direct teachings department. Specialization in the configuration department. Level 1 in the creation department. Overall results do not pass. Luo Nan's heart sank. The information refreshed once more. Subject specialization meets additional requirements. Calculating specialization bonus. General knowledge question bank is not weighted enough. Additional question bank data is transferred out. Specialization direction is being evaluated. Determining the direction of space-time configuration. Determining additional question difficulty to be specialization level 3 in space-time configuration. Can be lowered to specialization level 2. Can be raised to heaven stairway level 1. Selecting questions. He really had to take the test. Luo Nan gulped. He was a bit nervous. If he was not mistaken, generic, specialist, and stairway to heaven were the levels of knowledge in this mysterious civilization. The system also had the rank of petty officer. It looked like it was a judgment of social authority. It was similar to the SCA of Earth. It was not easy to make wild guesses about the mysterious civilization's method of judgment. But on the SCA's side, once one's authority level was set, one would need to spend a large amount of money to obtain victory through pure capital and power. Otherwise, one could only accumulate credit and contributions bit by bit. One step behind, and one step behind, one step behind. Warning! No corresponding questions have been found in the local question bank. Automatically linked to the Heaven Abyss mirror system. Linked to relay signal. Signal not linked. Signal already linked. Link broken. Warning! Link signal strength is extremely weak. Unable to link. Confirmation of authority review procedure failed. Bang! Luo Nan's fist smashed down, directly smashing the tatami into pieces. Snake Tongue and Yin Lo were both stupefied on the spot. Luo Nan's previous shouting and laughing was already very strange. Now his anger was completely without reason. Yin Lo wanted to ask, but at this time, the monocle floating in front of Luo Nan's left eye seemed to have a problem. Fine cracks blossomed on it, looking as if it could shatter at any moment. From Yin Li's angle, it was as if she could see the callous vertical pupils of a viper. They were filled with a dense feeling of inhumanity. Her courage to speak was completely drained in an instant. Whether it was Yin Lu or Snake Tongue, they both lowered their eyes and bent their backs. They just stared at the tatami beneath them like statues. So they didn't see the subtle change in Luo Nan's gloomy face behind the cracked monocle. Luo Nan felt the lens heat up slightly. The element that stimulated it was unexpectedly very far away. It was far behind the barriers of space and time. In the space of the tree hole of the mist maze where the lens was located. Right there, the torrents of information from every corner of the maze were still as chaotic and violent as ever. However, as the lens at the center of the tree hole, the screening efficiency of all the information had been significantly accelerated, and the corresponding consumption had been significantly increased, to the point that the spacetime of Earth was affected. It seemed that some sort of clue had been exposed. Luo Nan reached out to touch the lens. The already extremely frail structure really couldn't hold on any longer. It shattered in an instant, transforming into faint water vapor that dissipated into nothingness. Luo Nan didn't care about this. His attention was divided into two. One returned to the space of the tree hole, and the other stayed within the virtual brain system. Then he saw the virtual brain system's information window undergo a new round of refreshing. It repeated the previous steps. Confirmation of authority review procedure initiated. Connection to Heaven Abyss mirror system. Connection to relay signal. Signal not connected. Relay signal? How could there be such a coincidence? Luonan thought about the origins of the external neuron. It was actively connecting to this signal. There was certainly a close connection between this signal and the chaotic information flow of the mist maze. Luonan suddenly stood up. Such a large movement caused Snake Tongue and Yin-Lu to raise their heads to look at him. Luonan wasn't in the mood to pay attention to them. He turned around and walked toward the master bedroom. Luonan's mind had already turned in many circles in the time it took him to take 2 steps. He seemed to recall that there were settings for functions like receiving signals and network links. Found it. Luonan soon found the specific settings related to signal links in the virtual brain system. He brought up a detailed visualization window. The details of the signal strength were clearly displayed on the interface that he didn't quite understand. He didn't understand the specific professional units of measurement, but the thermometer-style bar graph, the hierarchical nodes, and the corresponding color configurations were things that even a fool could understand. The black area at the bottom, as well as the adjacent red area, clearly meant that there was no signal and weak signal. The pointer that represented the signal strength swayed between these 2 regions. There were no signs of it increasing. There were too many interference factors in Earth space and time. He had to go back. The sound of scraping would rang out. The bamboo lattice sliding door of the master bedroom sensed his arrival and automatically opened. Luonan entered with large strides. He didn't wait for the sliding door to close. His figure impatiently entered the transition process of the sandwich domain. He disappeared like a bubble before Snake Tongue and Yin-Li's eyes. The sliding door closed. 5 or 6 seconds passed before Yin-Li finally spat out the breath she had been holding back in her throat. She unconsciously laughed a bit. This could be considered self-regulation. Finally. The yacht is fine. Okay, these words weren't funny at all. Luonan passed through the sandwich domain and directly jumped into the tree-hole space of the mist maze. The noises belonging to the material world disappeared the moment he entered. The sounds of wind, water, breathing, and the low hum of the yacht's motors were all erased. However, this place wasn't quiet. On a certain level, this place was noisier and more chaotic. 99% of the torrent of information that came from the depths of the mist maze didn't have any rules to speak of. It just poured in like a swarm of bees. Humans were essentially creatures of experience. They relied on experience to generate imagination and construct basic cognitive logic. It was fine to completely ignore the information that couldn't be incorporated into the scope of experience, but one had to forcefully sort it out and deal with it for a long period of time. It was absolutely not like what Luonan had told Ruewen before. It was forever overflowing with interest. Coolness, calmness, and patience were the most basic requirements when working in the tree hole. Therefore, Luonan forcefully endured the impatience in his heart. He circled around the central lens body within the narrow space and slowly walked 2 laps. He took a few deep breaths in between to adjust his state. 2 minutes later, he repositioned himself to the information window of the virtual brain system. Then he saw that the indicator of signal strength had slightly increased compared to the one on the yacht. A slight increase. The number of times it probed into the black area had clearly decreased, but it still floated in the red area most of the time. In other words, the signal was still in a weak state. Also, the system had a pop-up window asking if he wanted to abort the connection, probably because the connection had failed too many times. Luckily, Luonan had already prepared his heart. Although he was a bit disappointed, he still decisively refused. Keep calm. The situation is improving, Luonan said to himself. There were 2 aspects to consider this matter. Currently, the signal link between the tree hole and the external neuron didn't form a large increase, but what about the other way around? What effect would the signal link have on the tree hole? Luonan projected his thoughts onto the lens. The lens received interference from soul strength, and it gradually changed shape and color from a transparent crystalline state to form a nebula-like structure. A portion of the so-called nebula was a reflection of true information. But there was also a considerable portion that reflected Luonan's processing and understanding of the collected information. In Luonan's mind, the mist maze was divided into 2 layers. One layer was inside. The other layer was outside. The outer layer was the shattered space where Luo Nan and Gong Qi had moved and fought. A trillion domain fragments floated within, forming a berserk, hazy, and immeasurable sandstorm. The sandstorm no longer possessed the ability to construct rules. With Luo Nan's abilities, he could arrange and assemble them in a relatively easy manner. If Luo Nan could do it, then the enormous gravitational law of the local spacetime of the Earth could be done as well. And so, a portion of the outer layer was constructed into the cloud world. In this sense, the outer layer of the mist maze was also dependent on the local spacetime of the Earth for its operation. Therefore, the natural environment and conditions of the cloud world were not too different from the Earth. This reflected the dependence of the rules. However, the direction of Luo Nan's research had never been the outer layer. According to his understanding, the so-called outer layer was nothing more than the waste that was ejected. It was a bewildering barrier that concealed the truth. The most valuable part of the mist maze, or perhaps its true appearance, was the deepest, inner layer region. It was the unknown structural core. From the long-term observation results of his father's double helix diagram and Luo Nan's observations over the past few days, Luo Nan was practically certain. Two kinds of rule systems were colliding in the core region. The intense collision caused the space-time environment to distort and fracture. The intensity exceeded imagination, forming layer upon layer of barriers that concealed the true appearance of the core region. The difficulty of observation in such an extreme environment was far too great. At the very least, his father had never succeeded in doing so until 6 years ago. The product of the Tree Hole project changed from a sail that sailed across the ocean to a satellite that orbited and surveyed the world. A large portion of Luo Zhongheng's later energy was used to analyze the signals emitted by the collision of galaxies. From Luo Nan's perspective, the Tree Hole was already of a very high level. But when faced with the complex environment of the core region, it became an old-fashioned radio. As the controller, Luo Nan could only endlessly adjust, calibrate, and cover manually in order to obtain a clearer and more accurate signal. There were no other methods that were more efficient. The problem was that even if the old-fashioned radio was manually operated to probe to the bottom, there were only a few circuits and components going back and forth. The audio signals received possessed clear rules and order. Luo Nan controlled the tree hole. There was no need to explain the complexity of the basic construction. He needed to mobilize his entire mind to capture the information flow from every level and every dimension. He needed to sort out logical clues from the chaos. Luo Nan was pondering over a more efficient method of analysis. He wanted to find an automated, semi-automated analysis method. He wanted to turn these details that needed to be sensed by soul strength into information that could be collected and analyzed by instruments on the material plane. He wanted to start with creation, but his train of thought wasn't particularly clear. And at this time, the signal link of the external neuron was like a beam of light in the darkness. This description was a bit disgusting, but it fit the essence. With his father's endorsement, the relationship between the external neuron and the mist maze was already as clear as day. It was just that he was unable to find a more substantial connection until the signal link appeared. Luo Nan was almost certain that the signal received by the external neuron came from the core region of the mist maze. Most importantly, this signal certainly possessed some rules and order that could be deciphered. Luo Nan was still unclear about the details within. He was unable to sense the signal that the external neuron could sense. He was completely baffled by the logic of the external neuron's analysis of the signal. It was like how ordinary people were unable to sense the electromagnetic waves that penetrated their bodies at all times, but the corresponding electronic products could make full use of them. What did this mean? Thinking about it from a bad point of view, this meant that Luo Nan knew what was going on, but he didn't know why. The problem still couldn't be solved at its root. But thinking about it from a good point of view, this represented that Luo Nan had touched upon another dimension of information. Even though he didn't understand the logic within, he was able to make a certain direction of filtering based on the linked state of the system and the flood of information. Even though this sort of filtering was destined to be a stroke of luck type, it greatly increased the probability of success. In terms of personality, Luo Nan had the bad temper of a researcher. He was also a bit philosophical and idealistic. He wanted to get to the bottom of everything, and he always wanted to integrate a universal truth that was applicable to all things. But today, he was going to be a theory of results. He didn't care at all what the signal-receiving module inside the external neuron was like, or what the logic of its analysis was like. All he wanted was for the virtual brain system to display the words link successful. Techniques, theories, and the like had to take a back seat at this time. What was needed was patience and focus. Luonan rolled up his sleeves and forcefully slapped his cheeks. Let's do it. Reality proved that once a person became focused, they had no concept of time at all. During this time, Luonan's entire mind was used on the manual operation of the tree hole. He used it on the separation, classification, and interference of the flood of information. It was hard for him to capture the unique characteristics of the so-called relay signal. He could only endlessly select samples from the flood of information, slice them, compare them, and filter them. Even if he couldn't increase the signal strength, he could still reduce the signal strength. As long as it was a method that could affect the relay signal, Luonan would search for it, examine it, and make a further attempt. Of course, he still had to make records. Since these were things on the perceptual plane, many of them were subtle and indescribable feelings. Luonan was really unable to reason them out logically. Aside from words, quantitative analysis, and structural diagrams, there were also large amounts of bizarre lines, outlines, colors, and the like. These were some immediate feelings, emotions, and impressions. Because of this, Luonan, who had always adhered to the classical realistic style of painting, had to deviate towards the modern and postmodern direction. Later on, Luonan flipped through the interface of the work area. Even Luonan himself was unable to understand psychic diagrams. Luonan even had to bite the bullet to recall and analyze them. He went back and forth like this. Over and over, he switched between the dual domains of logic and sensation. Luonan was highly sensitive to changes in information, but he was slow and even numb in other aspects. But numbness had its limits. Luonan didn't know why, but a wave of dizziness suddenly assaulted his mind. His mind went blank for a moment. He instinctively wanted to trace back to his previous train of thought in this moment of stupefaction. He flipped through the records of the work area, but his outstretched hand was clearly trembling. Sweat flowed down his wrist all the way to his elbow before dripping down. Why is it so hot? Luonan mumbled to himself. Only then did he discover that his head was covered in sweat. His body was also quite oily. But the most important thing was the feeling of exhaustion. The feeling of exhaustion from both the mental and the fleshly body was rapidly becoming clear. This was not a good sign. For someone like Luonan, who had the hidden danger of an imbalance between body and soul, exhaustion posed a greater threat than direct injury. Just like this feeling of stuffiness, there seemed to be an enormous source of heat in the surroundings of the tree hole right now. The radiated heat was endlessly increasing. But Luonan could sense that the material plane had not truly heated up. It was more like a psychological effect. This omen was not too good. It was like he was both mentally and physically exhausted. The structure of his body and soul was unstable, bringing about hallucinations and triggering a reaction from his body. Luonan shook his head and slowed down the rhythm of his thoughts. But he still could not help but look at the signal interface of the virtual brain system. The intensity needle was still floating in the red range. Even though it was far from black, it was still a certain distance away from the higher level of light orange. Oh, Luonan sighed. As for the Window's new message, the signal has been connected. The verification procedure has been initiated. The Heaven Abyss mirror system is awakening. Ha! Luonan's thoughts came to a standstill in this instant. A thousandth of a second later, a cry of He did not even pay attention to the window interface that was refreshing like a stream. Instead, he turned his head and stabilized the state of the tree hole and the lens in the first instance. Then he frantically recorded the concrete structure and sensory information. For a time, Luonen had to record, stabilize, and continue to make minute adjustments. He had no idea whether the direction was correct or not. He was simply like a clown blindfolded, riding a wheelbarrow and throwing knives. He was flustered and nearly vomiting blood. But a few seconds later, reality proved that his reaction was correct. The intensity of the signal continued to fluctuate in the red range. It did not change for the better, nor did it change for the worse. Of course, the link was unstable. It broke more than once in the middle. Luckily, Luonen was able to capture some basic data in that instant. He even had the feeling of unspeakable realm. He gritted his teeth and made adjustments, barely managing to maintain the frequency. After a series of operations, the signal link finally maintained a stable state for a long period of time. About 2 minutes? It was only now that Luonen, who was on the verge of collapse, had the chance to look at the refreshed window information. Perhaps he had really set foot into the deep contents of the external neuron. The window swept through the information stream. There were large amounts of technical words that he did not quite understand. There were some special nouns that he could vaguely understand under the translation of his secret glyph, but he was unable to find the corresponding description no matter how hard he tried. Luckily, there were still some relatively friendly characters mixed in. The Heavenly Abyss mirror system has partially awakened. Preparing for the verification of authority. The signal link strength is insufficient. There is a risk of interruption in the interactive test. Warning! Once the interactive test is interrupted, the verification of authority will fail. A second test cannot be conducted within XX time unit. It is recommended to increase the signal, or choose to download it locally and enter offline test mode. Do you want to proceed with the offline test? Oh, how considerate. It seemed that the person who established the verification program had also considered the various possibilities of the signal condition. The interactive test was definitely not an option. The current signal strength was unable to give one any confidence. The misty labyrinth was fundamentally a turbulent environment. With the current signal strength, it would be far too easy to fall. Then he would choose to download it locally. Warning! According to the verification program, the difficulty of the offline test will rise by 1 level. Luonen slapped his forehead, but he chose yes without the slightest hesitation. From his perspective, this was the only answer. Soon, a progress bar appeared on the virtual brain interface. There was nothing new about it. But Luonen was perfectly satisfied as long as it could persevere. Looking at the progress bar, the speed didn't seem to be slow. After observing for approximately 5 minutes, it seemed to be crawling at a rate of 1%. Before this thought could be completed, the signal was cut off once more. Luonen spat out a mouthful of saliva when he said, "Fuck." But no matter how restless he was, he could not be the slightest bit messy with the utilization and analysis of his power on the mental plane. Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he could not be bothered to wipe it away. Luckily, the signal strength was restored to an acceptable degree after a series of operations. The link was re-established, and the progress bar was already completed. It seemed that there were no losses. It looked like the basic connection function was still there. Luonen really was about to collapse. He sat down on his butt and leaned against the inner wall of the tree hole, gasping for breath. Time passed by bit, and Luonen wiped his sweat endlessly during this time. There seemed to be some problems with his body's metabolism. In the end, he was just too tired. The state of his body and soul had already reached its limit. Any more and it would be like burning oil in a lamp. There would be no benefit at all. Looking at the progress bar, it would take at least 10 hours before the download could be completed. And this was assuming that the signal link was stable from beginning to end. Luonen certainly would not be able to endure until then, given his current state of consumption. He needed to rest, otherwise he would lose control of his body and soul frame due to exhaustion. Even if the download was completed, he would not have the life to test it. After weighing the pros and cons in his mind, Luonen gritted his teeth and did 2 more experiments. He confirmed that the signal link strength was stable within a certain range under the current state of the tree hole. Though the data download was still intermittent, It would take a few seconds to a few minutes for the link to come back. The loss in progress was within an acceptable range. It's stable now. Luo Nan cheered himself on. He also did some mental adjustments. He needed to stabilize his mind and sleep. But when he leaned against the solid wall and closed his eyes for less than 2 seconds, he suddenly opened them again. This won't do. Luo Nan was aware of his own situation. The self-adjustment of his body and soul frame in an unconscious state would cause interference to the space-time environment involved in his domain, not to mention the precise environment of the tree hole. He needed to receive a stable signal at all times. If he slept here, all his previous efforts would have been wasted the moment he woke up. It was best to avoid it. How could he avoid it? Luo Nan grabbed his wet hair and pondered for a long time. Finally, he smacked his forehead. When he raised his hand again, his fingertips were clearly pinched with a fine and brilliant spark of electricity. He took out the external neuron and carefully placed this inconceivable strange object by the side of the lens, causing it to float naturally. Luo Nan cherished this strange object greatly ever since he obtained it. He rarely let it be exposed to the outside world. However, the tree hole could not be considered outside. This was a part of the construction of Luo Nan's domain. There was no essential difference between being here and being inside his skull. But in this way, Luo Nan could use the space-time barrier to create a buffer zone. He could avoid direct interference from the adjustment of his body and soul frame. It was a win-win strategy. Now, pull away. Luo Nan returned to Earth space-time once more. He looked at the light outside the porthole. It should be late at night. He didn't care about the specific time period at all. Luo Nan's legs went limp when he stepped on the tatami of the master bedroom. He was careless, and his left foot tripped over his right foot. He fell to the ground, sprawled on his back, and flipped over. The feeling of exhaustion and weakness had completely broken through his limits. He hadn't been this tired even when he fought with Gong Qi. Luo Nan confirmed one last time that the external neuron was still downloading after passing through multiple space-time barriers. Luo Nan quickly fainted. Actually, I should take a bath. This was his last thought. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.